Hey, Shawn Collins, 3M Application Engineer here. Thanks for joining us today. Today's video, we're going to be discussing plastic repair and specifically cosmetic plastic repair. Hey, before we get started, I do want to remind you to use the proper PPE. So for this video, I'm going to be using safety glasses, a respirator, and some gloves. Also want to remind you that this video is intended for a professional setting, such as a body shop. I put a link to all the safety and warranty information down below. Okay, so what we have here is a single-sided repair. So it's a deep gouge. The thing we have to be careful about with this type of repair is that we don't have any sharp edges around that gouged out area. So we're going to have to expand that area a little bit and soften those edges so there are no sharp or cliff edges that could cause that repair to show through later on. We need to have no sharp edges, nice and rounded. Otherwise it may what we call map or ghost, where you'll actually see that outline after these materials are in the sun expanding and contracting over time. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to use a little 3-inch DA with some 80 grit, and I'm going to expand that repair area just a little bit and round those edges. Like I said, you may need to use a file belt sander if those gouges are deep enough with a coarse Scotch-Brite belt on it to really round that out a little bit more. But for this repair here, it's not extremely deep where I can just do that work with the 3-inch DA. So the first thing we need to do with this repair is clean the bumper. It's really a good idea to clean the entire bumper rather than just the spot we're working on. Number one, you may identify some other damage elsewhere, and number two, you're not dragging any more contaminants from the dirty area to the clean area. So I'm going to use a cleaner and clean this bumper off before we start. Okay, so now I've got this bumper cleaned off, and by the way, I first cleaned it with soap and water in a wash bay, then brought it over and cleaned it with a solvent to get the non-water soluble contaminants off as well. So you need to use both types of cleaners to get it thoroughly clean, and it should be what I would say squeaky clean, where you feel that resistance and there's no slippery surface. So once it's real clean, the next thing we're going to do is do some sanding to round off those edges I talked about. Okay, so I stopped short of finishing because I did want to point something out. You see in some of these lower areas down in the bottom, it looks like the plastic is still a little bit shiny from that grinding action. So what we want to be careful about here is not having those shiny plastic areas. Plastic repair materials do not stick to slick, shiny plastic, so we need to make sure that's roughed up, just like paint doesn't stick to anything smooth. So I stopped a little bit short, you can still see that. I'm going to continue on until all those shiny, deep areas are gone. So now you can see that this is all sanded and there's no shiny plastic in there. These edges are nice and rounded. There's no sharp corners. At this point in the repair, now that we've removed the coatings and we've roughed up that surface, we only want to use clean compressed air for cleaning. We don't want to use any liquid cleaners in the immediate area where the coatings are gone. Okay, so you notice as well that I had to really get my DA up on the corner on the edge to get down in there. We typically tell you not to use an edge of a DA, but in this case, we need to do that to get down into that tapered area. The next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to taper a little wider around here with a 180 grit. I was using 80 previously. I'm going to go 180 around here So where my repair material ends up feathering out is into 180 scratches, not the 80 grit scratches that also could show through later on. So I'm going to continue with 180 around there, and keep in mind that repair area always gets a little bigger than you think it might, so give yourself plenty of room and remove those coatings in a wide enough area where your repair material will not end up on the paint. Okay, so I sanded the outer ring area with 180. You'll notice there's still 80 grit scratches in the center. I did not get my DA down into that area there. I still want that rough 180 down in there for a good tooth for that adhesive to grab onto. So I kept my DA up on this upper surface here. So I've still got my 80 in the center, 180 out here. Now we're ready for some adhesion promoter. Okay, so you can see I sprayed my adhesion promoter on this area, and that adhesion promoter is specially designed to increase the adhesive capabilities of that material to grab onto this type of a plastic. So always a good idea to use that adhesion promoter. You don't want to soak the material. You want to put enough on where it's wet, but not where it's soaked or there's puddles or anything of that nature. I would call it a medium wet coat. Then we need to wait 10 minutes for that to dry before we put on our material. Okay, so what I did now is apply my adhesive. You'll notice a few things. Number one, I equalized the cartridge first to make sure material's coming out of both ports. Then I just ran a little material out on the mixing board to ensure that that first little bit that's extruded is fully mixed. Always a great idea to do that, really necessary. The other thing you may have noticed is that I first put a tight coat down. So I took some material and put it on the bumper, and then I scraped it real hard and forced it down into the scratches and the surface. Okay, that's a really good idea to get good adhesion. Then I added more material, and I kind of cupped my spreader a little bit at an angle, little arch, so that when I spread it, it leaves more material in the middle is where I want it. The other thing is, you'll notice when I extruded the material, I didn't drag my tip and put a zigzag or anything like that in there. I kept the tip submerged in the puddle and just kept expanding that puddle of material to keep any pinholes out. So that's another tip that is really important, to keep pinholes out of that material. So now I've got my adhesive on there. We'll give it a few minutes and we'll start sanding. Okay, so I let this material sit and cure for about 15 minutes. Now you can speed that curing up a little bit with heat, but I would say gentle heat. Something with a heat gun, keeping your distance. You don't want to get it too hot, but you can warm it up and that will speed that cure a little bit. Now, pay attention to these time dots on the cartridge. They will tell you all that important information. 5 minutes of working time, 15 minutes to sand time, 30 minutes to paint time, and 4 hours for full cure. So make sure you look at those before you get started so that you know how much time you have to complete all these operations. So that's about the time we need to have this cure. Now what I'm going to do is I like to switch to a larger DA at this point, to a 6-inch, so I can pretty much plane over the top of the surface. A smaller DA could bite down into that low area. I want to go over the top of that area and plane it flat. So I'm going to sand this now with 180 grit. Okay, so now I sanded this with the DA sander with 180 grit. It looks real good. You notice I also check blocked it, so I used a block and just made sure that it's perfectly flat. Once I get the feel that it feels real good and straight, now I can continue on and use some 320 grit around that surrounding area. Okay, now this area is completely sanded with 320. Couple things to note. Number one, you'll notice I blew it off real good where I'm looking for any pinholes or imperfections. This looks real good. I don't see anything like that. Also, you'll notice that I stayed on the surrounding area as much as possible. I did just quick a couple passes over the top of that with the 320, which is fine, but we don't want to spend any time on that adhesive with that 320, maybe just a pass or two to smooth it out and make sure everything's smooth around the edges. So looks real good. At this point, I think I'm finished here. Now I do want to mention one other thing. There is another tool that we can use if some of that surrounding area is what we call fuzzy. It's kind of chopped up, a little bit rough. You can use this disc here to just go over those areas and get rid of all what we call the fuzzies. So I'll just demonstrate that quick as well. So this tool and this abrasive does a really nice job of smoothing that out. This one really didn't need it that much, but I just wanted to show this in case you do get some of those areas. So everything looks straight, complete, no pinholes, no scratches that I need to refine. It's all looking good. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this, please consider subscribing to our channel. Also, look for us and more content at the 3M Collision Repair Academy. I left a link below for that. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.